Hello friends, hope everyone is well. Today I am here to tell you a very old Halloween movie story. The movie was a huge hit at the box office and became very popular. Today I will tell you the story of that movie in brief. Hope everyone likes it. So without further delay, let's get started. The film starts on October 31, 1963, a chilly Halloween night in Haddonfield, Illinois. In a road stands a two-story white Victorian house. Somebody starts strolling toward it, and sees a 17-year-old Judith Margaret Myers through the front entryway, kissing her beau enthusiastically. As they move towards the sofa in the family room, the individual outside pursues them around the side of the house and watches through the window. The sweetheart inquires as to whether they are distant from everyone else, and she answers that somebody by the name of Michael is around somewhere. Her sweetheart puts on a comedian-covered tongue-in-cheek and kisses her. She chuckles and advises him to take it off, and he proposes that they go higher up to have intercourse. They run up the flight of stairs as the individual external the house chases after them back to the front. The shape sees the light in the higher-up window go out and starts quickly strolling back to the side of the house through the kitchen entryway. Rapidly, the shape opens a cabinet and gets an extremely sharp blade. It starts gradually crawling through the feasting and family rooms and arrives at the lower part of the flight of stairs. There, Judith's sweetheart is returning his shirt on and going out. Judith calls down the flight of stairs for him to call her the following day. He takes one final look up and discreetly leaves. When this occurs, the shape starts strolling up the steps into the dim foyer. Peering down, it sees the jokester veil on the floor. The shape gets it and pulls it over its face. Entering Judith's room, it sees her sitting before her mirror, naked with the exception of a couple of underwear, brushing her hair. She has her covered to the shape and is ignorant that it is remaining there. The shape strolls up behind her and she at long last feels its presence. Whirling around, she sees that it is Michael, the individual recently referred to, and is irritated, rapidly covering her bosoms. In any case, out of nowhere, Michael raises the blade and starts wounding her over and over in different regions of her body. Following a couple of moments, she tumbles to the ground, shrouded in blood. Quickly, the shape leaves the room, down the steps, and out the front entryway into the yard as a vehicle maneuvers into the carport. They are Mr. and Mrs. Myers, Judith's folks. Seeing Michael, they pull off his jokester cover, uncovering the essence of a youthful 6-year-old kid gazing into space with a numb articulation, actually gripping the blade in one hand. On October 30, 1978, almost 15 years after the fact, in Smith's Woods, Illinois, a specialist by the name of Sam Loomis and his partner, a medical caretaker named Marion Chambers, are heading to the neighborhood asylum to have Michael Myers, presently 21 years of age despite everything exceptionally perilous, taken to a meeting before an adjudicator, where his future detainment not entirely settled. In the vehicle is a matchbook with a promotion for the hair in red parlor. As Marion unobtrusively smokes a cigarette, she questions Dr. Loomis, craving to do this when out of nowhere, they see that few mental patients are prowling around the entry to the asylum. Dr. Loomis surges out of the vehicle into the downpour to see what is happening, similarly as a patient jumps on top of the vehicle. It is Michael Myers. Marion lowers the window to see what he is doing up there, and his hand arrives at through the window and gets Marion's hair, making the vehicle steer off the street. He and Marion battle briefly until she pulls away and advances toward the opposite side of the vehicle. In a flash, Michael's hand shows up at the window behind her and breaks it. Marion, surprised, opens the vehicle entryway and leaps out. Michael moves in and drives away. Dr. Loomis goes to Marion and control center her, telling her that the evil is no more. The following day, on Halloween in Haddonfield, a little kid of around 17 years of age named Lori Stepp is going out to stroll to school. On out, her dad Morgan Stepp, a realtor, tells her not to neglect to drop a key off at the old deserted Myers house on the grounds that a family is stopping by to take a gander at it later. As Lori go on down the roads, an 8-year-old kid, Tommy Doyle, approaches her. Lori is minding that evening. As they walk together, the Myers house materializes. Tommy tells Lori not to go up there since something terrible occurred there once. As she drops the vital under the mat, somebody shows up inside and glances through the front entryway at her. Lori leaves and keeps strolling with Tommy, who says he got the data regarding the house being spooky from Lonnie Alam, whom Lori says won't presumably ever escape the 6th grade. Tommy leaves not long after this, and Lori strolls on, singing to herself, when abruptly, the shape from inside the Myers house shows up right behind, gazing after her. In the meantime, back in Smith's Woods, Dr. Loomis is bantering with another specialist, Terrence Wynn, about whether Michael has gotten back to his old neighborhood in Haddonfield. Dr. Wynn doesn't figure Michael could head to Haddonfield and faults Dr. Loomis for not advance notice the staff about the potential for Michael's eruption. Dr. Loomis furiously moves in his vehicle and drives away. Sometime thereafter, Lori sits in English class at Haddonfield Secondary School when she sees the Smith's Woods Asylum vehicle left in the city outside the window. Michael remains next to it, in a grayish-white cover, watching her. Lori is scared and keeps on thinking back, when out of nowhere, the instructor approaches her to respond to an inquiry, frightening her. Lori answers the inquiry, and when she thinks back through the window, Michael and the vehicle have vanished. In the interim, at the Haddonfield grade school, the chime rings, and youngsters start running out of the structure. Tommy is leaving school conveying a huge pumpkin, trailed by a few domineering jerks who are insulting him about how the boogeyman is coming to get him that evening. Tommy is befuddled, not being familiar with the boogeyman, but rather is additionally scared. He starts to take off, yet he outings and falls, crushing the pumpkin. The domineering jerks giggle and run out through the jungle gym door, when in a flash, Michael leaps out and gets one of them. Frightened, the harasser runs away. Michael moves once more into the Smith's Forest Asylum vehicle and starts to drive close by Tommy, who is strolling down the walkway unfortunately. Michael then, at that point, drives off. On the parkway somewhere close to Smith's Woods in Haddonfield, Dr. Loomis remains at a payphone, talking with somebody from the Haddonfield police office, who appears to be impervious to the possibility that Michael could be coming to Haddonfield. Dr. Loomis, baffled once more, hangs up the telephone. However, before he can drive away, he sees a tow truck left close by in a lush region. Inside, he finds Michael's white clinic outfit and the bunny in red parlor matchbook. Presently Dr. Loomis is certain that Michael is in Haddonfield and surges back to his vehicle, not seeing the unclothed body of the tow transporter lying in the close-by grass. In the interim, the understudies are being delivered at Haddonfield Secondary School. Lori is heading back home with her companion Linda van der Klock, who's griping about the number of school exercises she should be engaged with in the following day, being a particularly famous and wonderful young lady. Lori, in any case, is by all accounts a calm book lover who doesn't have anything to do with the exception of look after children. As they stroll along, another little kid named Annie Brackett tracks down them. Annie and Lori discuss their keeping an eye on for that evening. Lori is minding, and Annie is watching Wallace, who lives across the road a couple of houses away. While they are talking, the Smith's Woods Asylum vehicle goes speeding down the road. Annie shouts down the road at the driver that speed kills and, abruptly, the vehicle stops however in a flash velocities back up and leaves once more. Failing to remember this matter and not understanding that they had a nearby experience with Michael, Annie and Linda share a cigarette and start concocting an arrangement to get Linda and her sweetheart, Bounce, together at the Wallace house where Annie is watching have intercourse. Lori and Annie progress forward, when out of nowhere, Lori sees Michael taking cover behind a shrubbery in front of them. Annie doesn't see him, and when she surges over to the bramble, there is no one there. Annie feels that Laurie is seeing men behind shrubberies since she is frantic for a date. Annie arrives at home, abandoning Laurie, who actually feels that there was somebody behind that shrubbery. Looking behind her, she inadvertently runs into Mr. Brackett, Annie's dad, and the sheriff of Haddonfield. Laurie is surprised, and Brackett, the neighborhood sheriff, answers that it is Halloween and everybody is qualified for one great panic. Laurie snickers and strolls back towards her home. Strolling into her room, she watches through of the window and sees Michael remaining in her neighbor's backyard, gazing up at her from between two columns of garments holding tight a line. 1 second he is there, the following second he is no more. Abruptly, the telephone rings, and Laurie goes to it. At the point when nobody answers and she just hears the sound of biting, she hangs up, scared. Yet again the telephone rings and it is Annie on the opposite end. She inquires as to why Laurie hung up on her and she answers that she thought it was an indecent call. Annie says that she had her mouth full and couldn't talk. Let Laurie know that she will get her for their minding at 6:30 p.m. Laurie hangs up and lies on her bed, attempting to reassure herself. Soon thereafter, Annie gets Laurie her home to go looking after children. They cruise all over for some time partaking in a weed cigarette. In the interim, Dr. Loomis shows up at the Haddonfield burial ground with the cemetery guardian, evidently with the expectation to visit Judith's grave. They find that Judith's gravestone is presently missing. Dr. Loomis knows now there can be no question that Michael is someplace in Haddonfield. Back in Annie's vehicle, the young ladies partake in pot and talk. Laurie enlightens Annie regarding seeing somebody in her neighbor's backyard, while behind them Michael, actually driving the Smith's Woods Asylum vehicle, gradually travels not too far off, following them. Laurie starts to hack subsequent to partaking in the Mary Jane when unexpectedly, they spot Mr. Brackett before a store somewhere far off and Annie orders Laurie to dispose of the joint. They maneuver into the parking area and talk with Mr. Brackett, who says that somebody, likely children, broke into the store and took a couple of covers, ropes, and blades. Annie answers that he puts everything on children and that he is a pessimistic dad. Mr. Brackett excuses them since they will be late, and they leave down the road toward their child-sitting tasks. After they leave, Dr. Loomis pulls up to the store and requests to talk with Mr. Brackett, who says it will be around 10 minutes. Dr. Loomis stands looking out for the walkway as the Smith's Woods Asylum vehicle passes right behind him. In Annie's vehicle, Laurie is concerned that Mr. Brackett realized that they were smoking pot, and Annie thinks essentially nothing remains to be stressed over. They start examining following day's school dance, and Laurie uncovers to Annie that she really likes a kid named Ben Tramer. Not long after this, they show up at their objections. Annie drops Laurie off at the Doyle house and maneuvers into the carport of the Wallace house. As she strolls into the house, the Smith's Forest Asylum vehicle pulls up along the bend. Michael gets out the vehicle and takes cover behind a tree in the Wallace yard, watching Annie. In the interim, Dr. Loomis and Mr. Brackett show up at the neglected Myers house. They start to look through inside, when they track down a to some degree eaten canine. Mr. Brackett says a man couldn't eat a canine like that, and Dr. Loomis answers that this isn't a man. Both of them walk higher up, and Dr. Loomis shows Mr. Brackett the room where Judith was killed. Unexpectedly, a downspout falls from the structure and breaks the window close to them, surprising Dr. Loomis, who pulls his firearm. He starts depicting his 15-year experience of watching Michael, seeing only unadulterated insidiousness inside him. Mr. Brackett asks what they ought to do, and Dr. Loomis advises him to illuminate the rest regarding the police, just to request that they keep their mouths shut. Dr. Loomis chooses to remain behind and hang tight for Michael since he figures he will get back to the Myers house. At the Doyle house, Laurie sits, perusing Lord Arthur to Tommy. Tommy becomes exhausted and says that he could do without that book and uncovers a few comic books that he has been concealing in the sofa, saying that his mother doesn't believe he should understand them. Not long after this, Tommy asks Lori what the boogeyman is, however abruptly, the telephone rings before she can answer. It is Annie, calling from the Wallace house. She lets Lori know that she just talked with Ben Tramer and let him know that Lori was truly drawn to him. Lori ends up being furious and humiliated, and asks Annie to say that she didn't converse with him. Right as of now, Tommy glances through the window and sees the shape remaining close to the Wallace house, a dark outline. He shouts for Lori that the boogeyman is outside, however when Lori peers through the window, nobody is there, and she proceeds with her discussion on the telephone. Right now, Michael has arrived at the rear of the house close to the kitchen entryway. Inside, Annie is in the kitchen making popcorn, not seeing Michael. She grumbles about Lester, Lindsay's canine, annoying her with his woofing. Abruptly, Annie inadvertently pours the margarine all around her shirt and jeans, and eliminates them while Michael keeps on watching. Annie finds a little button-up shirt and puts it on, wearing nothing else other than underwear. Right now, Michael inadvertently thumps a draping plant to the ground, breaking it and causing Annie to notice the kitchen entryway. However, Michael has gone to one more window when Lester, who is currently outside, sees him and starts yelping. Annie whines to Lindsay again that Lester is driving her up the wall, however not long after this, she hears Lester quit yapping and start crying. Outside, Lester is hanging in the air and his feet are beginning to go limp as Michael kills him. Lori and Tommy are sitting in the Doyle home watching the thing. Once more Tommy gets some information about the boogeyman. Lori says that the boogeyman and any remaining Halloween odd notions are pretend and that Halloween is just when individuals pull pranks on one another. Seeing that Tommy's as yet apprehensive, Lori guarantees that she won't allow anything to happen to him. Tommy requests to make the jack-o'-lantern as of now and they go into the kitchen. At the Wallace house, Annie goes to the outside pantry in the backyard and places her garments in the clothes washer, never seeing the shape looking in at her from the entryway and windows. After inadvertently locking herself inside, Annie calls for Lindsay to come and let her out, however Lindsay doesn't hear her. At the point when the telephone rings, Lindsay responds to it and it's Annie's sweetheart, Paul. Lindsay finds Annie trapped in the pantry window and delivers her. After they return into the house, Paul calls once more and lets Annie know that his folks went out and he has a valuable chance to slip away to see her. He requests that she come get him. Annie takes Lindsay across the road to the Doyle house so Lori can watch her for the present. Lori is hesitant, however Annie vows to converse with Ben Tramer in the first part of the day and let him know that they were simply messing around when she called him. At long last, Lori concurs, and Annie returns to the Wallace house. She enters the carport, whistling and singing to herself, and attempts to open her vehicle entryway, however it is locked. Baffled, Annie returns into the house and tracks down the keys, brushing her hair a piece in the mirror, nevertheless wearing nothing under her jacket with the exception of a shirt and underwear. Returning the carport, she opens the car. Not seeing that it is presently opened. Similarly as she plunks down controlling everything, she understands what has simply occurred. She arrives up to clear the haze off of the windshield, when abruptly, Michael jumps out from the secondary lounge and gets her throat. He cruelly chokes her until she debilitates and afterward quickly pulls out a blade and cuts her throat. Annie's eyes go wide as her face slides down the window, and she kicks the bucket. Inside the Doyle house, Tommy and Lindsay are sitting in front of the TV when Tommy takes cover behind a drapery and murmurs Lindsay's name, attempting to frighten her. Tommy pivots, and, regrettably, he sees Michael conveying Annie's dormant body once again into the Wallace house. Out of nowhere, Lindsay finds Tommy and the two of them shout. Tommy hollers for Lori, saying that the boogeyman is outside once more, yet she advises him to quit discussing it. Tommy gripes that nobody trusts him, however Lindsay concludes that she will. In the meantime, at the Myers house, Dr. Loomis stands holding up behind a shrubbery. Inevitably, three youngsters, one of whom is Lonnie Elam, go along and dare each other to head inside. Attempting to safeguard them, Dr. Loomis talks in a threatening tone and hollers at them to disappear. They dash away from the house and run down the road. Unexpectedly, Mr. Brackett leaps out behind Dr. Loomis, surprising him. Mr. Brackett gripes, telling Dr. Loomis that it will take more than extravagant converse with keep him up the entire evening slithering around shrubs. Dr. Loomis cautions him by and by of Michael's underhanded, and Mr. Brackett questions in the event that every one of the families and kids in Haddonfield could be arranged for a slaughterhouse. Dr. Loomis answers that they could be. Mr. Brackett consents to keep searching for Michael for the situation that Dr. Loomis is correct, however that's what he adds assuming he is correct, damn you for letting him go. Back at the Wallace house, Linda and Bounce show up in a van, both tasting from jars of brew and are extensively tipsy. They go over the arrangement that Annie will divert Lindsay while they go to the room higher up to have intercourse, not realizing that Lindsay is at the Doyle house and that Annie is dead. Weave lifts Linda high up and conveys her into the house. When they head inside, they track down every one of the lights off and nobody there. Seeing this as an open door, they fall onto the lounge chair, kissing energetically, while Michael quietly observes close by. Right now, in the Doyle house, Laurie, Tommy, and Lindsay have wrapped up cutting the jack-o'-lantern and stroll into the lounge room, making creepy commotions. They all plunk down on the love seat to wrap up watching the film, when abruptly, the telephone rings. It is Linda calling from the Wallace house while lying on the lounge chair with Sway's head in her lap. She asks where Annie is. Laurie answers that she went to get Paul, and she thought she'd be home at this point. Laurie advises Linda to get back to when Annie gets on the grounds that she has Lindsay at the Doyle house, and she has to understand what time to take care of her. Eagerly, Linda hangs up the telephone and lets Bounce know that Lindsay is away for the evening, and they run higher up. Laurie looks as the lights go out across the road. Higher up in the Wallace house, Linda and Bounce Sims are having intercourse while the telephone rings persistently. Linda cautions Bounce not to respond to it for dread it very well may be the Wallaces. Weave takes the telephone free and they continue the occasion, not seeing Michael's shadow sliding across the wall. Not long after this, they stop, and Linda lights a cigarette for every one of them, requesting Weave to go down the stairs for a brew. She chuckles as he goes ground floor, this being the greatest evening of her life. First floor, Sway gets 2 lagers out of the fridge and is going to empty them into glasses when he hears a commotion. He looks outside through the kitchen entryway, however nobody is there. Irritated, he opens the storeroom entryway when out of nowhere, Michael leaps out and pushes him against the arrangement of cupboards on the contrary wall. Michael lifts Bounce up high, wounds a sharp blade through his stomach and into the wall, and Sway bites the dust. Michael remains there briefly, watching Weave's dormant body like an inquisitive creature. Higher up, Linda sits documenting her nails when the room entryway squeaks open and Michael remains there, covered with a sheet and Weave's glasses over his eyes. Linda thinks this is Weave dressed as a phantom and asks him where the brew is. He won't reply, so she drops the sheet around her, uncovering her bosoms. At the point when the shape actually won't respond to her, she becomes irritated and gets up to call Laurie and ask where Annie and Paul are. She dials the number, yet similarly as she is going to speak, Michael comes behind her and chokes her to death with the phone string. When she shouts, leaving Laurie thinking it is Annie playing a trick. At long last, after Linda kicks the bucket, Michael gets the telephone, paying attention to Laurie's voice. She puts the telephone down and peers through the window as every one of the lights in the Wallace house switch off. Laurie dials the number for the Wallace house, however nobody replies. Going higher up, Laurie sees that Tommy and Lindsay are sound sleeping. In the meantime, back at the Myers, Dr. Loomis actually stands pausing, when out of nowhere, he sees the Smiths Woods asylum vehicle. Dr. Loomis starts running down the road, sure of where Michael is. At the Doyle house, when Laurie actually gets no word from anybody, she snatches her keys and inquisitively adventures across the road. After arriving at the front entryway, she thinks that it is locked and rings the doorbell. There is no response. Laurie strolls around the side of the house to the kitchen entryway. Heading inside, she looks around for any indications of Annie, Linda, or Weave, thinking this is a stunt. Not finding them anyplace, she strolls higher up and sees the light from a jack-o'-lamp spilling under the room entryway. Opening it, she finds with sickening apprehension Annie's inert body on the bed with Judith Myers' gravestone over her. In tears, Laurie backs against the storage room when unexpectedly, Bounce's body drops down into the entryway, dangling from the roof. Laurie shouts in fear similarly as the storeroom entryway opens, uncovering Linda's body also. Laurie runs out of the room into the foyer, backing against the wall. Out of an obscured room, Michael's cover shows up in the entryway behind her. Laurie strolls forward, remaining against the balcony. At the point when Michael connects with his blade and cuts her in the shoulder, Laurie shouts stronger than any time in recent memory and falls over the gallery railing, crashing down onto the flight of stairs and hyperextending her lower leg. Michael surges over to the highest point of the steps and starts strolling toward her. Laurie jumps up and surges towards the front entryway swiftly, yet it won't move. She goes through the lounge to the kitchen, locking the entryway behind her. She hurries to the kitchen entryway, the manner in which she came in, yet a rake has been pushed under the door handle outside. She is caught. Out of nowhere, Michael's hand gets through the other entryway behind her as he turns the lock and goes into the room. Alarmed, Laurie crushes through the glass with her uncovered hand and pushes the rake over. Pushing the entryway open, she runs out of the house and coincidentally finds the yard. She shouts for help and runs onto the yard of another house, yet nobody will help her. Hustling across the road to the Doyle house, she goes after the keys in her pocket, however they are no more. Overreacting, she beats on the entryway, yet Tommy is sleeping soundly. All at once, Michael shows up behind the Wallace house and Laurie starts to shout for Tommy. Getting a pruned plant, she tosses it at Tommy's window, waking him. He gradually strolls first floor, ignorant about the difficulty. At last, he arrives at the front entryway without a moment to spare and gives Laurie access. She locks the entryway and orders Tommy to go higher up. Flipping off the lights, Laurie accepts that she is protected, when quickly, she finds in dread that a window is open. Frightened past creative mind, she hunkers down before the lounge chair when out of nowhere, Michael jumps out from behind the love seat and attempts to wound her, yet he misses and raises a ruckus around town, all things considered. Laurie gets a weaving needle and whirls around, cutting Michael in the neck. He falters in reverse and raises a ruckus around town, clearly dead. Laurie, almost passing out on account of blood misfortune, drops the blade that is still in the lounge chair onto the floor and goes higher up to mind the children. Outside, Dr. Loomis actually strolls down the walkway when Mr. Brackett's squad car pulls up. Dr. Loomis lets him know that he found the Smith's Forest Asylum vehicle and he will go to where Michael is. Mr. Brackett drives away, presently genuinely accepting what is happening. Higher up at the Doyle house, Tommy and Lindsay approach Laurie, imagining that it was the boogeyman who went after her. She guarantees them that he is dead. However, Tommy says that she could never have killed him since he is unequipped for being hurt. Right now, Michael lumbers toward them, and Tommy and Lindsay in. The meantime, back at the Myers, Dr. Loomis actually stands pausing, when out of nowhere, he sees the Smith's Woods Asylum vehicle. Dr. Loomis starts running down the road, sure of where Michael is. At the Doyle house, when Laurie actually gets no word from anybody, she snatches her keys and inquisitively adventures across the road. After arriving at the front entryway, she thinks that it is locked and rings the doorbell. There is no response. Laurie strolls around the side of the house to the kitchen entryway. Heading inside, she looks around for any indications of Annie, Linda, or Weave, thinking this is a stunt. Not finding them anyplace, she strolls higher up and sees the light from a jack-o'-lamp spilling under the room entryway. Opening it, she finds with sickening apprehension Annie's inert body on the bed with Judith Myers' gravestone over her. In tears, Laurie backs against the storage room when unexpectedly, Bounce's body drops down into the entryway, dangling from the roof. Laurie shouts in fear similarly as the storeroom entryway opens, uncovering Linda's body also. Laurie runs out of the room into the foyer, backing against the wall. Out of an obscured room, Michael's cover shows up in the entryway behind her. Laurie strolls forward, remaining against the balcony. At the point when Michael connects with his blade and cuts her in the shoulder, Laurie shouts stronger than any time in recent memory and falls over the gallery railing, crashing down onto the flight of stairs and hyperextending her lower leg. Michael surges over to the highest point of the steps and starts strolling toward her. Laurie jumps up and surges towards the front entryway swiftly, yet it won't move. She goes through the lounge to the kitchen, locking the entryway behind her. She hurries to the kitchen entryway, the manner in which she came in, yet a rake has been pushed under the door handle outside. She is caught. Out of nowhere, Michael's hand gets through the other entryway behind her as he turns the lock and goes into the room. Alarmed, Laurie crushes through the glass with her uncovered hand and pushes the rake over. Pushing the entryway open, she runs out of the house and coincidentally finds the yard. She shouts for help and runs onto the yard of another house, yet nobody will help her. Hustling across the road to the Doyle house, she goes after the keys in her pocket, however they are no more. Overreacting, she beats on the entryway, yet Tommy is sleeping soundly. All at once, Michael shows up behind the Wallace house and Laurie starts to shout for Tommy. Getting a pruned plant, she tosses it at Tommy's window, waking him. He gradually strolls first floor, ignorant about the difficulty. At last, he arrives at the front entryway without a moment to spare and gives Laurie access. She locks the entryway and orders Tommy to go higher up. Flipping off the lights, Laurie accepts that she is protected, when quickly, she finds in dread that a window is open. Frightened past creative mind, she hunkers down before the lounge chair when out of nowhere, Michael jumps out from behind the love seat and attempts to wound her, yet he misses and raises a ruckus around town, all things considered. Laurie gets a weaving needle and whirls around, cutting Michael in the neck. He falters in reverse and raises a ruckus around town, clearly dead. Laurie, almost passing out on account of blood misfortune, drops the blade that is still in the lounge chair onto the floor and goes higher up to mind the children. Outside, Dr. Loomis actually strolls down the walkway when Mr. Brackett's squad car pulls up. Dr. Loomis lets him know that he found the Smith's Forest Asylum vehicle and he will go to where Michael is. Mr. Brackett drives away, presently genuinely accepting what is happening. Higher up at the Doyle house, Tommy and Lindsay approach Laurie, imagining that it was the boogeyman who went after her. She guarantees them that he is dead, however Tommy says that she could never have killed him since he is unequipped for being hurt. Right now, Michael lumbers toward them, and Tommy and Lindsay run once again into the room. Laurie runs into another room, opening a bunch of entryways prompting the overhang and, concealing in a storeroom, attempts to trick Michael with regards to where she really is. She ties a couple of stockings over the storage room's door handles, however Michael before long starts shaking the entryways and arrives at through them with his blade, cutting the stockings. He separates the top portion of the storage room entryway and ranges in for Laurie, unintentionally turning the light on. Laurie snatches a wire holder and cuts Michael in the eye with its point. He hops back in torment, dropping the blade into the wardrobe. Laurie takes it, grasping it in her grasp, and wounds Michael in the chest. He tumbles to the ground, dead. Laurie cautiously gets out of the wardrobe and, seeing this, drops the blade. Requesting that Tommy and Lindsay emerge, she advises them to go down the road to the Mackenzies' home and advise them to call the police. They take off from the house, shouting, drawing in the consideration of Dr. Loomis, who is outside and approaches the Doyle house. Inside, Laurie is drooping against the entryway of the room where she was stowing away, drained and practically oblivious. She doesn't see that Michael, remembered to be dead, is gradually ascending behind her. Laurie stands up, leaving the room, when out of nowhere, Michael snatches her by the neck and starts to choke her. Laurie retaliates and pulls his veil off, uncovering Michael's actual face. Quickly, Dr. Loomis shows up at the highest point of the flight of stairs and fires Michael with his weapon. Michael falls in reverse into one more space as Laurie falls against the wall behind her, covering her ears. Dr. Loomis pursues the killer into the other room and sees him remaining before the gallery entryways. Dr. Loomis shoots him 5 additional times, making him drop out the entryways and off the gallery. Michael bangs onto the ground underneath, seeming, by all accounts, to be dead. The specialist glances back at Laurie, who says, "It was the boogeyman." Dr. Loomis seriously answers, "Actually, it was." Thinking down beneath, he finds with dismay that Michael has disappeared, yet Dr. Loomis knew up and down that this would occur. Laurie understands that Michael actually isn't dead and starts wailing. The film closes with a dose of the Myers home and the sound of Michael breathing intensely behind his veil. Michael Myers, the unbelievable man who returned home on Halloween night to kill, is as yet alive far out in the distance. Well, hope everyone liked this story, so don't forget to like and subscribe without delay. I will appear before you with more new stories in the coming days. Until then, bye.